and where we've been recording, or thought we were recording, only for there to be no evidence of it afterwards. So I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed, because I think the last session I recorded, it didn't save, and I've heard other lecturers make the same complaint, but it says it's recording, so we can assume it is. So let me find PowerPoint. Okay, bear with me. Ideas generation, 40 tips to know. There we go. And hopefully you can see on your screen, brain shopping, tips and tricks for generating ideas. Right, brace yourselves. What we're going to do is we're going to cover these 40 top tips. Some of them are methods that you're probably already familiar with, but some will be new and some will be quite a surprise. But in the midst of all this, we will also cover off the use of visual metaphors as well. So you're going to get almost 2 lectures in one here. And if it drags on too long, or it seems to be dragging on really long, we'll take a break at number 21. So brain shopping, we call it. Tips and tricks for generating ideas. I'm going to go through each of these ideas and explain the benefits of them. So tip number 1, triangulate. Right, so this method of ideas generation is probably one that you're most familiar with, and certainly have had it drilled into you, where you identify 3 sides of the problem. So what you do is you collect and organize ideas in these categories: who your audience is, that's really important, what message it is that you're trying to project, and what is the tone of voice, the graphic language. These are the 3 components that should be kind of like hone in on the problem. So like, for instance, you're designing a poster for a museum. Well, who is the audience specifically? Well, okay, it's probably going to be kind of like someone equally creative, like-minded as yourself. But what's the tone of voice? Is it humorous? Is it emotional? Is it emotive? Is it information? And what is that message? What is it that you're trying to say? Those are the 3 elements that must coexist together, work together. Every design problem has to be triangulated in that manner. So anyone who's chosen number 1, that's the focus I'd like you to give in your work files. Number 2, make a cube. Well, what that means is you take an idea or problem and you approach it from various perspectives. You describe it, you like what you identify the problem, you compare the problem with similar problems, you analyze and break down, you associate elements or issues with that problem, and then you apply. So what you're doing, you're arguing effectively for and against all these issues. It's a bit like, like opposite sides of the cube. This is really good if you're working as a group. And if you ever do work as a group, it's good that you distribute the workload and give each person one aspect of the cube to focus on, so that there's no overlap. So effectively, for every question, there's a right and a wrong answer. So think in terms of opposites all the time. If you kind of get into the mindset of, well, what if? Like, if something is right, then something must be wrong. Or if something is good, then something must be bad. It's always opposites, just like opposite sides of the cube. Tip number 3, think like a journalist. That's really important, because in many ways, as a graphic designer, you're a problem solver, you're always looking for the answer. Think of it like looking for the smoking gun, like the clue, the evidence. You ask questions as to like who, what, when, where, why, and how. You've probably heard those terms before. Think of it in terms of like a pin board where you're putting kind of like information relating to each of these aspects of a project. I can go into more detail as to what they mean. So when I say who, I mean, who is your audience? Who's your client? And who are the competitors? So again, if you want to relate this to, say, your museum brief, again, obviously we've covered then it probably a broad spectrum of audience. But what if you decided that it was to appeal to a younger audience? What route would you take? Last year, when I think it was Megan, she did Museum of Torture, but she approached it from a very kind of approachable, almost naive perspective, using her icons, her smiley icons, experiencing various degrees of distress, which obviously from a graphic language perspective, that would appeal to a younger audience. So it was trying to add fun to what could have been a very dark subject. So, your audience often is your client, but also, think in terms of your client's audience as well. And as always, who are the competitors? What are you up against? Always consider that, and always look at the competitors because you want to be able to compare. And then there's the issue of what. Like, what is the message? What reaction are you looking to achieve in terms of perhaps a call to response? Or are you looking to simply raise the awareness and the profile of that museum, say? And of course, time and time again, what graphic language do you intend to use? What would be the language, the graphic language that most resonates with that audience or is most appropriate for the delivery of a particular kind of message? And then there's the when. Now, when is actually just as important, because when is kind of like, when are you saying it? Are you're like, if you're like, is it for a seasonal rollout, or is it halftime at the Super Bowl? The when, the occasion is really important. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing a Christmas campaign in the middle of July. Or is it seasonal, or is it all year round? The where are you saying it? What media do you intend to use? Is it going to be a poster, a magazine? Is it going to be online? Is it the internet? Is it from the surface of the moon? Yeah, like that is really significant. Is it a roadside hoarding? And if so, where? And for what purpose? And is it relevant? Then the question of why. Why is an idea better than another? Do you have any other ideas? So what you do is you analyze your ideas, and you approach it from a pretty kind of critical perspective. Always look at your work and think, well, how would I be judging this piece of work or this idea if I was not the originator? If I could look at it with a fresh eye, with an honest eye. And did I just go back? So why is the idea better than another? Yeah. And how is the best way to say it? Humor, shock, or emotion? So again, these are decisions that have to be made on every project that you will do as a graphic designer. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4, make a word salad. You're probably most familiar with this method, but I'm just wondering how many of you find it effective. I see a lot of you writing down words that you can think of that can be related to the problem. You saw the words to discover patterns and ideas. That's kind of really important. But do you actually use these either spider diagrams or word salads? You think what you should be doing is using it as an opportunity to come up with word associations or different ways of saying the same thing. Where are the synonyms? Perhaps get a thesaurus and find new ways of saying the same thing. So related words. So whether it's, say, the theme of your museum, say it's Halloween. So then you've got kind of like word associations with Halloween until hopefully you start to see a pattern form. And ideas can jump out of the page just from doing a word salad. So you can solve the problem in words alone. So get them out there and get them interacting with each other and see if there's any kind of connections or any patterns. Let me kind of illustrate that, how that works as a method. Let's take the Absolute Vodka campaign. And let's say my word is youth. So I have to come up with a solution for absolute youth. Now, remember, I need to look at the audience. I need to look at the message that I'm giving, but I also need to look at the tone of the voice. So whether it's going to be serious, humorous, or emotional. So let's do the word salad method, where we have the word youth, and then we search for all the other expressions which can be associated with that word. So in many ways, we're just looking at different ways of saying the same thing, whether it's kind of like childhood, immaturity, teens, adolescence, early life, early years. These all mean youth, yeah? So let's say we get it all down there, and then we look at those words, and we then highlight just one of them, say early life. And then we think, right, okay, so absolute youth, how many forms of early life are there? There's obviously, we can still relate to the other words in the list, like kind of like absolute teens, absolute young days, absolute adolescence, that one could work, and so on and so on. Or we can use an image that implies youth at its most extreme, which kind of sounds complicated because we're looking at words, and it's much easier if we can look at a visual. But what if we were to take a very kind of almost tongue-in-cheek approach to the Absolute campaign, and we wanted to be able to say absolute, so obviously the bottle is going to be apparent there, and youth. What would be the most extreme in terms of youth? Well, I guess you can't get any younger than still being in the womb. So this is obviously a pretty dark black humor, which probably wouldn't even get past the board of licensing. But we're not doing this for real time. We're doing this for ourselves. So that's absolute youth, and that's all because of the word associations and looking for a pattern. I guess I could have come up with a dozen other solutions, but that's one that just seemed to click and come to mind. This is where visual metaphors are also in play, which we'll go into more detail. Number 5. Yes, do a Google check, but don't use Google as your only source of research. But you do want to, in all cases, find out who else has solved a similar problem to your own. it's really important that you surround yourself with other people's contributions in the same similar field. So again, if you're doing a horror poster, you know, how many horror posters have been designed, or book cover designs, you know, like anything that's related to the theme, in whether it's a storytelling mode or whether it's a campaign for something similar. Number 6, go to the library. Now, you might be forgiven for believing that almost everything on the planet is already now digital, but it's not the case at all, really not. And in fact, let me just unsteal the screen and show you by example. I can do that quite easily. So here I am, me again. So I've been working on a project rebranding the Olympic Games, and I bought 2 books. This is one of them. You see that? Look how thick it is. Inside this book is just a fountain of knowledge and reference. More information about the Olympics than I could ever find online. So it is possible that, you know, like a good book, especially, you know, like most recently in print, because if it's the most recently in print book, the likelihood is that it hasn't been fully digitized and made available on the internet. So never underestimate the importance of literally going to the library for more information. You'll all, in a library, you will find potentially a lot more depth. And also, it's much easier to flick through the pages of the book for inspiration than it is to scroll from page to page. So go to the library, and if any of you are wondering where the library is, there's a picture of it. It's that building just across the road from the Henry. Sorry, yeah, and yes. Oh, and if any of you are wondering what a bookshelf looks like, that's what a bookshelf looks like. So find yourself in the right place, find yourself in the library. That's really important. And I wouldn't mention it if it wasn't important. Number 7, rewrite the problem. We do this, apologies for the noise in the background. We do this in industry all the time. Whenever we have a client, we write the brief. That's the first thing we do. The client has the problem or has a mission or wants to achieve a certain particular purpose. So we write the brief with the client, or at least for the client. So we kind of redefine the problem. And that gives us an opportunity to establish a fresh angle. You know, like, what can we do that's different and why? So rewrite the problem is the same as rewriting the brief quite often. Redefining it. Number 8, imagine the obvious solution and now imagine its opposite. So effectively, you want to be able to kind of like straight off the bat, think of the most obvious solution. That's perfectly natural, but then use that as an opportunity to think entirely opposite to the obvious. That gets you kind of like thinking outside the box much more quickly. Take, say, a campaign for Lego. So what you're trying to do is you want to sell more Lego bricks. Yeah. So, okay, well, there's a pile of bricks, you know, but the thing is, you've got to be able to see the wood for the trees and break the problem down to much more kind of like digestible aspects. So when you say you're trying to sell a lot more Lego bricks, effectively what you should be looking at is not the kind of like the girth, you know, like the extreme of the problem, but the singular aspects. You know, like a single brick is Lego. That, you know, like that is what you're selling at the end of the day, and that's where your focus can be. And one of you yesterday featured the work of this campaign for Lego, which reduces the problem to its most simplest form. And the essence of the campaign is that it's simply delivering a message saying that Lego in the right hands is limited only by the imagination of the user or the person playing with those bricks. So it's just making a very simple message come alive in a very simple way. Tip number 9. Look for solutions that you admire. Analyze why you admire them. This is something, this is really important because it helps you develop a vocabulary, a visual vocabulary. You look around you, you find all around you, in supermarkets, you find everywhere, and you see work, you see packaging, you see food packaging, you see posters, but what you've got to do is if you like something, you say, oh, I really like that poster, try to articulate it more than just like. What is it that you admire about it most? You know, like, take the Apple logo, for instance, you know, like, which is a very familiar graphic device. Most people are familiar with it. But if I turn on the construction lines, it gives a clue as to perhaps why you might like it, because it's got this beautiful composition of well-drafted curves. It's actually a piece of mathematical ingenuity. So that's kind of like, you know, that's good enough reason why you would like something when you break it down, when you analyze it. So if you see a poster, you know, like, you might admire it for its beautiful use of composition, or its beautiful use of color, or its structure, or whether it's a beautiful example of metaphor. So whenever you put, say, examples of work in your research folder, you know, like related work or competitors' work, try to annotate kind of why you've included it. What is it that you like about it? How do you how does it make you feel? And how do you measure its effectiveness? Yeah. I mean, you could, you know, like when Steve Jobs sadly passed away, I think it was a Japanese designer who was quick off the mark to do a reiteration of the Apple logo with the silhouette side profile of Steve Jobs' face, you know, which was, you know, like such a beautiful, simple offering, and was able to make a strong, obviously, juxtaposition connection between Steve Jobs, the human, and against the backdrop of the large empire that he helped build. So that's kind of like my attempt to kind of analyze and articulate why it works. You know, like also because of the kind of like just right proportionate balance between the figure ground relationship as well that makes it successful. Okay. Number 10, think like an interior designer. So on every project, what you really need to be doing is creating a mood board with either magazine clippings, fabric samples, snapshots, keywords, etc. A real kind of mashup. This mood board is really, really valuable because what it can often contain are hidden gems. Perhaps you, as the collator, you're the creator of a mood board, you may not be fully familiar with what is in that mood board that means something else to someone else. So I've often find it very, very useful when sitting next to you guys, you know, like having one-on-ones where I look at the mood board and I start to look at it, looking for connections and looking for patterns. And I often can see things in a mood board that perhaps the originator didn't fully appreciate. So the more rich, the better. You know, so think of your mood board as a bit of like a word salad, but it's a visual equivalent. So this one is obvious. I think this one is making a connection with London. This one's making a connection with theatre, and you can see the word love appear quite a bit. So yeah, plus they make like exciting graphic offerings in their own right anyway. So mood boards, very important. More the better, bigger the better, busier the better. Number 11, share your ideas. This is actually a very important aspect of the creative process, again, used in the industry a lot when we're together as a creative team. Some aspects of the project, yes, you work in isolation, but most of the time the best work is when you all beat to the same drum and you work together as a team. And in order to be able to have appreciate the bigger picture, it's good that you are able to put either the work on the wall or do something equally collective online. So nowadays, having, say, a whiteboard online to be able to just stand back and look at all the work together. Reason why this is important is because obviously many minds make light work. So if you've got a team of people, they're all seeing it from a slightly different and more fresh perspective. And one idea can lead to another. That's the way it works in the creative process. Someone at a table or in a group might make one suggestion, which is completely perhaps unrelated, but then a connection is made. Or a small idea can be sparked and then it becomes a conversation, and then before you know it, it's like on one person starts a sentence that someone else completes. And you can only achieve this if you have the environment where you can share your ideas and view them all together at the same time. So find a place to pin up your ideas and look at them as a group and discuss as a group. But again, in these current times, that can be easily converted into a virtual environment as well. So think in terms of perhaps Behance. You can actually add work. You can add work in progress. You don't have to publish it, but you can share a project. Say when, a group of you are working together. Tip number 12, which is that term that we use a lot, but what it means is thinking outside the box, is effectively thinking about the project from a different perspective. So that's, if you say you're a graphic designer, I know that. But what if you approached the project from a 3D designer perspective? Yeah. That's you thinking outside the box. Try to almost reinvent your approach. Try to avoid the kind of the normal set. If you feel that you need to kind of go about this in a different way, which is thinking outside the box, then wear a different hat. So what would you approach it from a typographic perspective or a photographic perspective or even an illustration perspective? Think different. Yeah. So apply thinking from another field to your problem. I'll give you an example. Oops, going backwards again. So for instance, how would a zoologist design a backpack? So say you're designing a backpack as a graphic designer, that's one thing. But if you pretended that you were a zoologist, you would have different influences and a different perspective. You'd definitely have different knowledge base. You would have a different understanding of a specialist area of expertise, and that is zoology. So I kind of hazard to suggest that a zoologist would design a backpack not too dissimilar to this, which is a backpack made up of different animal patterns and fabrics. Equally, how would a chef choose a color palette? Again, What's unique from a chef's perspective that's different to that of, say, any other? How do they look at things? Again, I kind of hazard to suggest that perhaps a chef would choose a color palette from the perspective of the preparation of food and the many colors that that would have to offer. So again, those are examples of trying your best to think outside the box, just approaching it from a different perspective through the eyes of someone else. So I'm just taking a swig of water. Tip number 13. Again, this is really, really important. Every project you have, what you've got to do is find a way of undoing what might originally seem overwhelming. So this, just like, projects get better and more relevant when you break the problem down into something unique. So like, for instance, you're doing a museum poster, but that's not being specific enough. So therefore you have a theme, say you have horror poster. Well, then even that's not broken down enough, because you could go, you know, like, even deeper into breaking it down so as to make it more unique. The more you break a project down, the more you reduce it, the more you can come up with a solution that seems only appropriate for that particular project. The bigger the more overwhelming the brief, the more options you could argue, but you'll never be able to rest on one solution that you think, oh, that's just perfect, because you've got to make a connection between the reduction of the brief, reduction of the problem, and breaking it down into specifics. So like, take this kind of museum of posters. We add something to it. Now it's a museum of horror posters. So again, horror posters as opposed to any other kind of posters. So this could have been a solution for, say, Halloween as well. Tip number 14, make a word map. Similar to a word salad, but this time you're writing down the problem on a piece of paper, diagram everything about the problem, context, history, similar problems, competing ideas, available resources, etc. So it's not just word associations, but it's phrases, it's facts, it's kind of connections, relationships. Again, this is the kind of the method that can be used where you can solve a problem through the power of words. Tip number 15, write down every obvious solution you can think of in order to clear your mind of for something new. So never be afraid of any idea that you might have. All ideas are worthy. Even bad ideas, or what might prove in the grand scheme of things to be a bad idea, it's good to get them off your chest, kind of out your system on paper, so that it clears your mind, clears your head for something new. Because once you've put it down on paper, saying, right, okay, that's one idea, you can either discard it or further develop it. The most important thing is the more ideas, the better, because you don't know until you further develop whether an idea is a good one anyway. So most important thing is to get as many ideas written down. You don't have to scribble them, but you do have to articulate them. That's tip number 15. Tip number 16, think like a curator. And that's what we graphic designers, we're almost human magpies. We collect things, we're very eclectic. So collect everything you know about the problem and display your data or material and look for meaningful patterns again. So like we stay on the horror theme here. Collect as many kind of like variants of horror, whether it's kind of like use of typography, use of imagery, use of phrases, etc. Be a curator, be a collector, be a human magpie. Collect everything just relating to that specific theme, the theme of, say, horror. Tip number 17, think like an anthropologist. Now, what this, an anthropologist is someone who observes human behavior. This is actually quite important. If you're, say, a packaging, and you're coming up with a packaging solution. But what you want to be doing is observing people doing an activity relating to your problem, say like using a product or completing a task or even taking the bus, etc. Watch how they use items and undertake tasks. It might offer a clue and a fresh perspective as to how people go about it. How do people read a poster, say? I know that might seem like a pretty obvious one, but are they reading it in passing? You know, like, is it one of those stop and stare, or is it a glance in the corner of the eye? Is it read differently from a distance? Do people interact with that poster? And if so, how so? Kind of image here of the evolution of man and how the tools that we use have actually influenced and impacted on kind of like evolution itself. Here's another cartoon spoof for you. So you'd like, how would a surgeon request a spoon in the same manner as if it was in an operating environment, operating table? Looking at people just opening a bottle of wine, what kind of process is involved? Will that have an impact on the way that the packaging is designed? How do they hold the bottle? How do they hold the corkscrew or the cork knife? Yeah, so these observations could have an impact on the design solution. Similarly, the evolution of the most apps are as a result of the study of human behavior, how people have come to relate more to gestures rather than clicking of buttons, swiping from left to right, up and down. So it's all becoming gestures as opposed to necessarily clicking, click, click, click all the time. Again, with that understanding and that knowledge and that kind of use of anthropology has actually helped the evolution of our understanding of navigation. Tip number 18, ask people what they like and don't like about your work. You are in that kind of unique position of being able to court the opinion of other people. You're able to come up with a solution and ask people if they get it. You have to think, what is their first reaction to it? That's always the most reliable test, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, peers, preferably people who are not as close to the project as you are or as familiar with the project, so that they can really offer a fresh perspective. So, and like, never be fearful of people's opinion towards your work. Just ask them, like, what, like, show a piece of work and say, do you get it? I remember when I was at Pentagram, Alan Fletcher came up to me one morning with an A4 sheet of paper. It had a green thumbprint on the front of the letterhead. It was a letterhead design, and on the reverse, it had 4 kind of fingerprints. Each one was in green. And he asked me, do you understand what this is? And after a couple of moments of thinking, I made a connection between, okay, so green fingers, that's got to be something like a landscape gardener. And I was right. So again, it's what you do often is it's your job to come up with brain teasing exercises to see whether people get that little tease or not. Some of the best graphic design solutions require some thinking to figure them out, and then when you do figure it out, there's a huge level of satisfaction and gratification. Tip number 19. So as people what they wish, like what do they, like especially as a client, they know what they want, but what do they wish for? Which might not always be the same thing. They might think that they know what they want, but if you, as a graphic designer, one of your most important skills is to always ask the right question. In fact, a graphic designer can probably successfully design anything through merely asking all the right questions, okay? So kind of like getting inside the head. You are actually performing the role of a bit of a kind of mind reader often. You're trying to analyze, interpret the needs of your client, but especially when the client doesn't know what they want. But you can establish what they want through asking the right questions and better understanding their needs. Tip number 20. So ask people about their personal experiences towards a particular product, if that's what you're designing for, whether it's kind of like wine, like what are their kind of unique perspectives towards that field of interest that you're designing for. If it's a museum, like ask people who have perhaps either been to the museum, what do they get from it? Try to get inside the head of people's kind of personal attachment to the theme in question. And there might be a solution there. Tip number 21. Find a place to think. So this is actually really quite important in a very kind of busy, noisy 21st century. Find somewhere you won't be distracted by the tasks around you. So like right now you're working from home, but it's important that that place is somewhere that you can rely on for when you need uninterrupted, non-distracting kind of like time to design and concentrate. You can't bring out the best in you in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. Like sometimes you've got to close the door and have complete concentration. That's really important. That's kind of part of the human endeavor as well. Tip number 22. This is where some of the suggestions can get quite funny, but whenever you're in the middle of a kind of a design project and you're at this stage of trying to come up with ideas, and you've gone through most of the suggestions that I've made so far, like you've followed the right procedure. Perhaps in time you'll become more and more experienced and good at it, but sometimes you just hit a brick wall. You've got to down the tools and just either go for a walk or indeed take a shower. Just one or the other, or both, if you like. It's anything but flogging the horse. But also, when you're out walking, your brain will be in a state of escape from the problem. Here's the thing. If every time we designed something, we referred to it as a problem as opposed to an opportunity, the project would live up to its description, and that would be it's a problem. What you've got to do is turn a problem into an opportunity at all times. Never think of a project as a problem. just an opportunity. So with that in mind, when you just simply want to take a break away from the project, as I say, just go for a walk, have a shower, do something other than the design work, or kind of do anything other than concern yourself with the needs of the project. Now, in doing that, your brain will go into a more relaxed mode, and it's then that you might be able to kind of like come up with new ideas, and in which case, write them down. Okay. Another tip, which some of you would be kind of like hopefully agree with, is tip number 23. Try an alternative therapy. So again, it's like you are a professional designer, and it's your job to kind of like take on the burdens of the world and come up with exciting original solutions. But again, you may run into kind of like the bottleneck of kind of like endeavor, and it's normally comes about through fatigue or trying too hard sometimes. What you need to do is you just need to do something alternative, something that you enjoy doing, though. That's the really important thing. So if you enjoy shopping, fine, go shopping. If you just want to take time off and just watch a movie, I mean, if you're not in the right mood to design, it's likely because you've been at it or trying too hard for too long, and that you need to give yourself a break. So the time it takes to watch a movie, which is about an hour and a half, could be just the amount of time for you to just switch off and just don't think about anything. So whatever your therapy is, whether it's perhaps playing on your game stations, it's like just turn your brain off. Like me, I get a lot of pleasure out of cooking because, it's like, first of all, it has practical implications. At least, it's like you've got to eat. But cooking can be very creative, and you feel as if you're creating something in the same time that you would be staring at your computer anyway. So at least you've got something to show. So whether it's watching a good movie or doing some essential shopping, or for me, cooking is kind of like the antidote. And I then come back to the project, having felt that I've at least achieved something in the last hour and a half. Here's another interesting one for you. And that is try a natural stimulant. When I say natural, I mean the likes of tea, coffee, or citrus juice, preferably, especially lime, lemon, or grapefruit. Now, here's a fact, especially the citrus juice. What that has, this has been proven, research has proven this, that the neutrons in your brain are actually kind of excited when exposed to citrus in your system. It kind of like sparks brain cells. It's drinking something like grapefruit juice before a presentation helps you think quicker. I haven't drunk any this morning, but it has worked for me in the past. So either something sharp like lemon, or as I say, lime or grapefruit. But it actually ignites neurons in your brain. I bet not many of you knew that. Now that you know that, perhaps you might want to give that a try and see what effects it has. As I say, these are natural stimulants. Any other kind of stimulant is just going to work against you because it will only eradicate what you have going naturally. But then a natural stimulant, whilst it obviously is kind of supercharging, adding a higher level of electrical impulses to your brain, it also kind of, which could put a lot of strain on your brain, of course, but natural substances, because of their very nature, being natural, any kind of extreme impact that it has on your neutrons can be recovered anyway. Tip number 25. Eat less food. I bet you didn't. I bet you weren't expecting this one. Digesting a big lunch consumes energy that your brain could be using to get ideas. Um, fact, fact. If, say, you may have experienced it yourselves. If, say, you've had a really late night or an all-nighter, and then you have a huge breakfast, all of a sudden, once like you've made it through the night, but you're feeling really tired after that meal. Actually, it doesn't even have to be an all-nighter. You can feel tired after a meal anyway. What's happening is the way that the human body works is that it's like a machine which focuses all its attention, all its kind of like inner workings. If, say, you've had a meal, your digestive system kicks in, does it not? And in doing so, that requires energy. And so a lot of your energy is being diverted to your digestive system. Now, the body can only do so many things at one time. And what it does is it diverts its energy to what it needs to be doing at any one time. So if you've eaten a huge meal, you're actually going to be less, your brain is going to be less effective because it's your body's digestive system that's taking all the energy available. That's why you feel tired after a big meal. So I guess eat less, perhaps even eat more often, but smaller amounts. So as not to put the your body under too much strain. Giving you diet advice at the same time as essential tips. Tip number 26 works in the same way. Chew more gum. I bet you didn't know that that was going to be on the list. So research shows that chewing gum not only cleans your teeth, but loosens up your mind and makes you smarter. The way that one works is, say you're chewing something like gum. What's happening is that there's kind of like Ferguson, Manchester United manager for many years who constantly chewed gum from the sidelines. What it does, I'll take you back to this first screen. What happens is that you're chewing, so therefore your body is expecting to kick into digestive mode. So what it's doing is it's kind of like supercharging itself, ready to perform a certain function, but it hasn't allocated that that function because the chewing motion is what makes your system aware. But of course, you're not consuming anything, so there's no food to digest. So it's one way of actually raising your battery level, but without applying it to any strain, in which case it can then be applied to your brain. So if you think about it's kind of like basic biology, really. So just a simple thing as chewing gum, which is kind of like telling your system, kind of like prepare yourself for going into overdrive in the area of, say, digestion, which then doesn't occur. What you've done is you've just kind of given your internal battery a bit of a boost, a higher charge. Tip number 27, put all your ideas on index cards. This essentially is a tried and tested formula. What you do is you compare them, you can sort them, you can rank them. By putting ideas on separate cards, you can rearrange them and rank them in different ways. And because it's not, I know that a lot of you work in, like your sketchbooks or your work files, and you scribble things down in a permanent manner. But if you work with Post-it notes or cards, and you say work on a wall or just on a bigger surface, you can move things around, you can take things out, you can swap things out, you can put things back in. So just using the tried and tested card index approach is, works for a lot of people. Tip number 28. I wonder how many of you have ever managed to master this technique, designing in your sleep. Think about your idea while falling asleep or waking up. I've often, and it's really weird, it's really strange, but I've often dreamt about a project and come up with a solution in my sleep. I've also, get this, and this is really weird. Say I've lost my car keys or my credit card, and I've looked everywhere. And honest to God, people, I've actually dreamt about the very same situation, lost car keys or credit card, and I've actually found the solution, found where they are in my sleep, in a dream. And I've woken up and there they were. Now, I believe that there's a strong relationship between the more relaxed your brain is, the more creative it is. So therefore, in a state of sleep, one would assume can't be any more relaxed than that. But you've taken away the pressure of the kind of day-to-day reality. So you might want to, don't know how you engage it, apart from perhaps thinking about the project whilst falling asleep. You stand a better chance of dreaming about that project. And come back to me, any one of you who've managed, who have either done something similar to that in the past, or you're about to try it now for the purpose of this little exercise. Tip number 29, wear 6 hats. As a graphic designer, you have to wear many, many hats in order to be able to see things from entirely different perspectives. So evaluate an idea from, that should say 6, not 5, different perspectives. So think of those hats as different colors. Like emotion, information, optimism, pessimism, growth, process. Let me explain more. So information, what are the facts relating to that project? Okay, it's almost like the sheet that I gave you. Red, oops, sorry. Emotion, what does the idea make you feel? Optimism, what's great about the idea? Okay, from a positive perspective. And from a pessimistic perspective, what's wrong with the idea? So you are kind of, this is where you are applying a critical, analytical approach to your work. You are almost playing the part of the client. You want to be able to anticipate criticism towards your idea and kind of like nip it in the bud before it then becomes a reality used against you. What are the alternatives to the idea if, say, there's something wrong with it anyway? So keep going backwards and forwards and kind of like just simply swapping one hat for another. And how is the evolution process? How is the evaluation process going? So what you're doing is you're evaluating the worth of your idea, and kind of like measuring up against expectations. Tip number 30. So yes, sketch. Make quick, simple diagrams of different ideas. I do this a lot. I can't stop myself sketching whenever I'm sat with you guys in a one-on-one when we're having a brainstorming session. You might notice that I'm actually sketching the ideas as we go along, and then I'll probably give you those sketches as a record of our feedback session. The sketches are really important because, again, you're getting closer to what could be the solution in visual terms. Even just a crude sketch, and I'm not a very good drawer, but I don't need to be an excellent drawer, not like an illustrator, a professional illustrator. I sketch, and sometimes I'm the only one who even understands what the sketch is all about. But it's okay, as long as you understand what the sketch is about, what your sketch is about, and what it means. 31. There's sketching, but there's also, like think in terms of making, like make models, like out of cardboard tape instead of pencil and paper, like like use a different means of visualizing. It could be that you're designing a object that will become the solution, or like I'm hoping that some of you will actually end up making physical things for your posters anyway. So now might be a time to even while still thinking of your ideas, put into practice how certain things could work by creating what we call a maquette, which is a paper interpretation of a physical interpretation made out of paper or cardboard. Tip number 32, visualize the competition. This is really important because no piece of work stands in isolation. In graphic design, you are effectively in a marketplace that is shared by others, or certainly is the case for your clients. So make a map showing where your problem, product, client, or concept sits in relation to similar or competing problems or ideas. So you've got to be able to, your work has always got to be able to measure up to your competitors. A classic example is a supermarket. Like best example of where graphic design solutions are in direct competition with each other. Which one stands out the most? If, say, you have a kind of a very noisy sector. What I mean by that is perhaps it's incredibly most of the competition is busy and colorful and crazy. You're not going to stand out if you're just equally busy, noisy, and colorful. You're just going to kind of blend in, are you not? But a smart move would be to say, right, everything is busy. We're going to go simple and therefore bolder, and we'll stand out more. And this is quite common if you just look at the bookshelves in a magazine shelf in a bookshop. It's like which cover stands out and for what reason. You've got all these kind of wedding and bride magazines. Which one stands out? Probably the more simple one. Probably the one directly in the middle with the blank cover, being the only one with a blank cover. Whereas the ones that have more articles on the cover and lacking in what we call visual hierarchy and focus tend to be less attracting. Same goes for like album cover designs, really any kind of design. Like what do you want to be, a sheep that follows or a wolf that leads, or whatever the expression is. Be different, and different is good. So visualize the bigger picture, similar to kind of like one of the points we just made earlier. But tip number 3 is visualize the bigger picture. What that means is think in terms of the grand scheme of things, like the connections, like whether it's a logo design, like for a major FMCG brand, which is fast moving consumer goods, even all these major companies and all these brands, they actually have a family of related brands that they own. So you may want to pull back a little and make a connection with those brands. Think of it in terms of All right, let's look at this in a different way. Take shopping. Okay, so the process involved of, say, you need a shopping bag to pack your shopping in. But then think of the life story of the shopping bag after you've finished using it as a shopping bag. What happens to it then? What is the bigger picture? What is the bigger story even? And where does the story lead? So you're looking for kind of, I guess, probably again, like looking for ways of making connections. Yeah, tip number 34. Design a system or a tool instead of an object or an artifact. What that means is that perhaps your solution, and this is often the case, say, when you're doing a 3-part campaign like your posters, you want to be able to come up with a system that can apply to all 3 posters. In the same way that, say, Coca-Cola used red, they use it in different ways, but it's still consistent across its various platforms. So the red of Coca-Cola is actually the tool, and that tool then becomes the kind of the code for the rest of the campaign. Compare and connect. Tip number 35. Find metaphors for your problem. Now, this is probably one of the most important ideas generation aspects of idea generation, the art of visual metaphor. And because of that, we're going to go into it in a lot more detail than the others. So I'm going to introduce you to the art of metaphors. Remember, we're parking up at number 35 with only 5 more to go. So a metaphor, now we're going to focus on this because metaphors are used very effectively in graphic design, and some of the best, if not all the best solutions are a play on words or a metaphor in some way, form or another. In the same way that like the world's a stage, obviously quoted by William Shakespeare. Well, the world isn't a stage, is it? That's a metaphor. So obviously, like referring to the world as a stage is using that phrase to imply that all its players, all the people that inhabit the earth are its players, which is another metaphor. So how metaphors work, right? So a metaphor is a figure of speech in which a comparison is made between dissimilar things. Okay, that's the core principle of a metaphor, whether it's a narrative metaphor or a visual metaphor. In its visual form, we could say you've heard the term horsepower, which implies kind of like the amount of energy and the amount of kind of power produced by that force. And it's actually measured in horsepower, even car engines. But in the same way that you think a running track, or whether you're on the running track or on the back of the horse, like you can make a similar connection. They're dissimilar, but you can make a connection by referring to them as the same. So think of metaphors as coming in 2 varieties, okay? There are pure metaphors and there are fused metaphors. I'm going to introduce you to both of them. First of all, pure metaphor is something that stands for the benefit or feeling we get from a product. This is a good idea when your product is intangible, but also when it's boring to look at or complicated or obscure, or when everyone else is in your category does one thing, like show a car, for example, and you want to do something different. So a pure metaphor is used to when something isn't physically tangible. So when you perhaps can't sum it up as an object, but as a desire. Take, for instance, kind of like the use of the galloping stallion for Ferrari. They use that as their badge to say a lot about the car without having to show the car. So you're making associations between kind of like, yes, horsepower, wildness, untamed, unbridled, like passion. All this, it has been summed up in the purest form, and that as a pure device. So think of, yeah, so the point is, like a pure metaphor is something that is normally difficult to quantify in visual terms. So what you're doing is you're associating feeling and emotion through the use of a completely different, often unrelated visual device, where you're then expecting your audience to make the connection between the two. We look at the scene of this guy in his hiking boots, peering over an arid landscape, probably Arizona somewhere. What message can we put to that? Yes, I guess from the clues that you're looking, that you see in, you see, okay, big outdoors, freedom, tranquility, peace, solitude, vastness, openness, immenseness, distance. All these words come to mind just because you're looking at a single image. But if we put a title to this, it kind of changes the perspective. So if we say knowledge is free, visit your library, all of a sudden, just through the power of words, we've changed this, we've given the image a completely different slant. And many of the words that I just quoted, I reamed off, like immenseness, vastness, can also be associated with knowledge. Vastness of knowledge, depth. So this is effectively kind of like the use of type and image working together, like juxtapose. And that's an example of a pure metaphor. Now, let's park up pure metaphor and focus now on fused metaphor. Now, with a fused metaphor, you take the product and you fuse it with something else. Okay? And I'll show you this. I'll show you by example. Say take a running shoe. Running shoes, but running shoe is the product. So we've got to come up with a campaign to sell it. And the extra grip is what is unique about the running shoe. So what we need to do is we don't need a metaphor necessarily for the running shoe, but we do need something that represents extra grip. Apart from the obvious, which would be the grip on the shoe, which would be kind of like below us, because obviously that would be literal rather than the use of the metaphor. So what you do is you just simply bring items together. So you've got a trainer, but you've also got a chameleon, or whatever those little things are called, but they grip really tightly to branches. Perhaps you can leave a message in the kind of chat as to what those little creatures are. They're like little dragon things, aren't they? Anyway, they grip very well. So then, in the sense of an advertising campaign, if you wanted to then promote a new shoe that that has particularly powerful grip, you would then fuse the two together, perhaps. And in terms of kind of like, and what you would be doing is you would be creating a kind of a fused metaphor. Okay. So the power of graphic design fusion comes from combining two cliches, symbols or aspects of the situation into one new image. Think in terms of either additional, and that's adding something to an image, or substitute, replacing part of an image with something else. So what I'm saying is that fused metaphors come in two flavors, either additive or substitute. And hopefully I can explain the difference between the two. Take this image here, which is kind of, I think it's a sculpture by Rubens, and it's the thinking man, somewhere in Italy. So in order to turn that into an additive or addition, or demonstrate the use of an addition metaphor, you would not change or substitute something, but add something to it to then give it a secondary meaning. So for instance, if we add this, and now we're designing, say, either a poster or a book cover, and we say, you know, my mechanism of the mind. So obviously what we're doing, you see, we're taking kind of like the image of the thinking man, which is making reference to the mind, but we've also put a mechanical key on the back of the figure, which is implying something towards something implied towards mechanism. So that's adding something. Though we didn't change anything, we just added. Similarly, we take this, say, tomato, and we want to create, say, a campaign that perhaps is making a statement against the overuse of, say, cosmetic surgery for improvement. You've got to, so the tomato then becomes the perfect form. You know, like it's a perfect tomato. And yet, if you don't change anything on the tomato, but just add something to it, say we've got like a botched up or graphic interpretation of the botched up surgery. It changes the meaning, it adds meaning to it all of a sudden. And that can be used as a campaign, depending on what kind of message you want to deliver, but it's certainly implying something that would be a combination of kind of like, why change something that's so beautiful already, you know? Here we have a substitute metaphor where the silhouette of Bob Dylan, but the hair has been substituted so as to give theme and subject of, obviously, kind of like the psychedelic era that the music belongs to. So we haven't added hair that wasn't there. We've just substituted the hair for the kind of like the psychedelia graphic language of the time. In the same way that this is a substitute, the key already had a key cut, but now we've changed it. So we've substituted it for something resembling a city skyline. And so now it's making the key look as if it perhaps could be the symbol for a city-based real estate agent. In the same way here, this is a metaphor, like the real thing in the palm of your hands. So that's effectively a additive metaphor because we've added something to the story to help complete the message. Here, famous design by Milton Glaser for New York, where the heart is the substitute for the word love. So I love New York. So yes, that also is a metaphor. Here, campaign to promote perhaps or raise the awareness of the extreme of achievement and where a particular tennis player is famous for the most powerful and the fastest serve on the circuit. And so it's using the grenade as, so the message there is danger. And which is an appropriate metaphor for to complete the message, and that is a dangerously fast server. This is the metaphor which is suggesting that the TV network 11 News or News One channel, effectively their selling strapline is that we bring the news into your living room. And so what it's doing is making a kind of a connection between when we're out there in the field, you're in the field with us. We bring the news to you, we record it, and you may as well be the camera in our hands for how close we bring you to the action. So there is a metaphor. It's a substitute metaphor because it's replacing the woman who's kind of like in her slippers and curlers at home watching the TV. We've substituted the cameraman's camera for that woman. So let's make a couple of metaphors, okay? Let's take, say, let's go back to kind of like trying to bring two elements together to complete a message. So we're going to try and sell a tire with extra grip, okay? So that's the proposition. Selling that tire, but that tire has a selling point, which has separated it or made it unique from its competition. It's got extra grip. So with your word salads or your kind of like your word mashups, like you go for like whether it's kind of like sticky tires, but what else is sticky? Well, then you go through lots of kind of images, and one of them would be sticky tape. Other things which are sticky, which are octopus with their tentacles in each of the suction pads. We have that little iguana hung on the tree. That was another symbol of stickiness. So we've got all these kind of opportunities to bring the elements together. Remember, we're trying to sell a tire, but we're using unrelated imagery to bring them by way of the metaphor, and by sometimes what you can create is an unlikely combination, and that can be a very, very powerful graphic instrument, because by bringing unlikely combinations together, you increase the level of curiosity. So tire, sticky tire. So the tire becomes the Scotch tape. And that's actually an actual campaign called Sticky Tires for Continental tires. But equally, we could have gone down the route of the octopus and the tires, which this is an actual campaign for a competitor. So again, the Scotch tape or the octopus are both playing the role of visual metaphor. Let's have another go. So let's say we're selling a pack of butter, but what's particularly unique about this butter is that it's made with sea salt and not normal table salt, whatever the difference is, but apparently it's more natural. So, okay, well, butter is butter and salt is salt. So this could prove to be more difficult than you can imagine. How can we do anything that is particularly unique, interesting, or intriguing? So what you do is then, well, you find out more about both. So you look at where sea salt is harvested, and it really does come out of the sea, it would appear. So if that's the case, then perhaps it's not the image of the harvesting of the salt, but the connection with the sea itself, because yes, it's a two-word metaphor anyway, because sea salt is really a description, but the sea element is actually a strong metaphor in itself, because it suggests kind of like vastness, like, and natural and nature. So, and then we go back to the butter. And remember earlier when I said, think like an anthropologist, look at the way people interact with products and see if you can pick up any clues from the way that people either kind of like interact or navigate with a particular kind of product or entity. You're looking back at food here, looking back at butter rather. And then in really posh restaurants, when they bring you a butter plate, they often they produce what you call a butter curls. I think it's a special knife that you use to create these butter curls. And immediately you can see the connection between perhaps the what's happened to the butter there and the proposition that's been proposed, which is butter with sea salt. You only have to turn it on its side, and there you have it. You've completed the metaphor. So you've made a connection with the sea, and as you can see from the strapline there, butter made with sea salt. So what you've done is you've used the ocean wave as the metaphor for the sea, and you brought the two together as one meaningful message. Clever, huh? Let's do another one. So how about an outdoor art exhibition? All right, so there's a couple of things there to unpack. We've got outdoor and we've got art exhibition. So we can split it into two. So effectively, this is an outdoor exhibition. So what is that really? I mean, that is bringing art to the outdoor. Forget the word exhibition. We know it's an exhibition because it is what it is. So we're looking to make a connection between outdoor and art. And we always think, oh, well, that's sculpture. Yes, but art is art in any form, in any medium. So we look at how this kind of like park is highly interactive, and yes, it is predominantly made up of sculpture. But what we're trying to do is come up with visual connections with the themes. So as I say, we've got outdoor, and we can tell that it's predominantly in a park or a garden. And so we then look for connections with associated with outdoor and gardens, and the colors and natural, like how flowers are nature's most beautiful art form anyway. So like one of you have got the garden museum. Like, well, like, since the beginning of time, like graphic designers and illustrators have been observing flowers for their beauty, their geometric form, like drawing them in a stylistic way, and they are and have enjoyed the attention of many an artist. So, okay, so flowers could be the angle here. They could be the kind of the anchor, the graphic anchor. Let's go back to the nature of image making, or one of them, and that is simply painting, and how whenever we make images, we draw upon the fullness of the color palette available in the same way that an artist uses paints. Then you think, okay, paint tubes. we're trying to say art, and what better way often is to just simply show the like the medium, like whether it's watercolor, gouache, oil, whatever, but just kind of like in its raw, unused form. And then, if you go back to one of my lectures last semester, the one on Gestalt psychology, and one of the theories of Gestalt psychology was the use of proximity, and how bringing things together in a particular relationship can also add meaning. Well, this is what occurs right here. So what you do through the power of juxtaposition, you've now made a connection between the kind of outdoor nature of the art exhibition. That is a metaphor. You're playing with words. Are you playing with images in the same way that you would be playing with words? So you can see how that can become just something like that can then become this. And what a beautiful piece of work it is. How simple, It is saying everything you would want to say about an outdoor art exhibition. Hopefully you would agree. Let's say we're selling a car now. So we're going to sell BMW. So what can we say about BMW? Or perhaps a client would be saying, all right, so it's fast, supple, aggressive. All right, so those are word associations, but each one is an invitation to use the visual metaphor to interpret those meanings, because some of them are not tangible, difficult to sum up, supple, aggression, or even fast for that matter, but you can use elements that have natural associations. So just reading those descriptions, they all seem to apply to an animal instinct, a kind of an animal characteristic. Then you look at the product, and you look at the headlights of the vehicle itself, and you see how even they look like cat's eyes. And indeed, you're looking at cats, and their eyes have a strong parallel with headlights, just going backwards and forwards on those. Now, the cat here has the same characteristics: aggressive, fast, supple. So really, to be quite honest, that cat is the BMW of the animal kingdom. And this is the final campaign. So it's a real campaign, and it was put out to sell the latest model of BMW, the ultimate driving machine. And that's using the cat as a metaphor, the Jaguar. Say, okay, we go down market a little bit and we try and sell the Peugeot 206, but not just the normal, just any old run-of-the-mill Peugeot 206, but the RC version. Now the RC version is it's like a Peugeot 206 but on steroids. It's a small car with a big engine. So that's what that's the proposition. It's a small car with a big engine. So it's a small car with lots of muscle, you could say. Now, big engine, saying lots of muscle, saying muscle is a metaphor. It's a narrative metaphor for engine. So big muscle, sorry, big engine becomes lots of muscle. So equally, when you agree that you are what you drive, or that's what most manufacturers would like you to believe, then you are effectively this is a small car that gives you muscles. Okay? So let's have a look at the human form and indeed a study of muscles, and try to make a connection between the muscle power and the car. And you think, how's that possible? Well, it is. And that was the campaign poster used for the launch of the Peugeot 206 RC. Some of you will no doubt, once you received your first paycheck in industry, probably rush out and buy an Audi R8. It would be perfectly natural for you to want to do that. Let's try and sell one, shall we? So the Audi R8, it's a particularly beautiful car. It's powerful, superior, intelligent. These, in many ways, those are the same kind of ways of describing, say, a game of strategic intelligence like chess. And indeed, it shares some of the same terms like power play, which is a chess move, or a particular style of playing chess in a very aggressive, but leading the field method of gameplay. So what you then can do is say, okay, then if say chess is the equivalent or shares some of the properties that we want to associate with, say, our Audi R8, then what we do is we bring them together so that the car, the Audi, becomes a supplement, a surrogate for one of the pieces, which in this case, it replaces the king in the chess lineup. So that's then suggesting that the Audi R8 is the king of the road. And that's a metaphor. So let's maybe apply a metaphor for a worthy cause. Let's look at the World Wildlife Fund. And the brief or the proposition is that fashion claims more victims than you think. So that's actually a very kind of emotional strapline. And indeed, there's plenty of evidence in terms of kind of like the use or the wearing of furs, which have been promoted by the fashion industry over many, many years. But thanks to the work of the World Wildlife Fund, people are kind of less inclined to wear real furs, because at the end of the day, we're kind of reminded that, these furs kind of like once belonged to one of nature's most beautiful, contributions. And you only have to, it makes it very difficult to even think about wearing a real fur when you really think about what price there is to pay. Remember, this is the strap line. I'm just going to go back 2 screens. Fashion claims more victims than you think. So effectively, the price that there is to pay. And the victims are the animals themselves. And it's not just the main animal, but it's the whole pack, from baby cub to daddy lion, and all the in between. In the same way that you have different sizes, don't you? You only have to look at the label to see that there's extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and how often your options are across all those sizes. So this is how the two are brought together in a campaign. So fashion claims more victims than you think. So now look at this with a completely different, from a different perspective, showing both kind of like the baby cub and the main and the adult lion. And it, so fashion claims more victims than you think. It can claim the entire pack, the entire family. They are like walking garments ready for slaughter. So that's a really powerful, poignant use of visual metaphor. Okay. Alrighty. Back to the tips. Enough about visual metaphors. So tip number 36, emphasize. Imagine yourself as the user, the reader, and the client. All three together and all three separate. And exaggerate the problem. Yes, kind of like think of the problem in its most extreme, especially based on some of the images I've just shown you through the powerful use of metaphor. Like how extreme can you go? Like the more kind of emphasis you put on the use of your graphic imagery or your use of metaphor, the more powerful the point that you can make. Number 7, simplify. Explain your idea in a single sentence. This is actually really important, and I've seen this time and time again in industry, and also in like when studying the subject, as you guys are doing now. If you're able to articulate the solution in a single sentence, then you've nailed it. If you have to spend an entire paragraph explaining the idea, the likelihood is that the idea is way too complicated. What you're looking to do is come up with a simple idea, something that can be simply explained. A bit like the outdoor exhibition, art exhibition, outdoor flower. So that could be described in a single sentence, forming a flower made out of tubes of paint, period. So you push a button and in 5 minutes, the Mercedes picks you up and takes you where you want to go. Okay, and I think that was the pitch that the founder of Uber kind of put to his investors, all summed up in a single sentence. This is how Mark Zuckerberg pitched for Facebook.
It was to make something where you could type in someone's name and find out a bunch of information about them.
That was it. Didn't need any more explaining than that. So think in terms of kind of like keeping it simple. There's an expression which is keep it simple, stupid, which is kind of like KISS. Think of KISS, keep it simple, stupid, which I don't use that often myself because it could be misinterpreted as a bit of an insult, especially with the word stupid at the end of it. Number 38, set constraints. The more constraints, the better. Constraints are just like constrain yourself by the use of medium or media and see where that constraint takes you. It's a bit like tying one hand behind your back. It just makes the project a lot more interesting rather than it being way too open and all your options available. So restrain, kind of like force restriction on yourself or on the project. You don't really have to tie your hand behind your back. 39 is recycle. A bad solution for one problem could be a good solution for another. So as I mentioned earlier, that we graphic designers, we're like human chameleons. We collect things. We're like, yes, we are like human chameleons, but we're also like magpies. We collect things. And we don't often know, we don't even care what we're collecting or why we're saving things, but we know that it might come in handy in the future. So be very eclectic, because then that way you can recycle things later. Also, when you might come up with a really good idea. You might come up with an idea that's not necessarily the right solution for the project that you're working on, but park it up, save it, because you never know, that idea might become more valuable on another project down the road on another occasion. And finally, when you hit a dead end, try and try again. So never give up. Don't simply like yield to kind of like either the end of the road or hitting a brick wall. Just try again, even if you've got to go back to square one or reset the project. I've seen a couple of you do it, and you go down a rabbit hole of no return. But you know what? Learn to. There's a saying that goes, "Learn to kill your babies." It's a horrible expression, but it's like learn to throw away. Be brave enough to throw away an idea that's not working, and start again. Perseverance, grit, and determination are the key factors here, and that's really, those qualities are what are the making of the best of graphic designers. Grit, will, and determination. You have to form kind of like muscle memory as well, and sometimes calluses. So that's kind of the end, or is it? Because metaphorically speaking, this could also be the end. Or we could say it in a completely different way if we wanted. That could be the end. Or it could be the end of the road. Or it could be Life of Brian, the end. Or it could just be kind of like the end in Condensation on a Mirror. Or it could be a classic black and white movies, earlier days of filmmaking, the end. Or it could be, I had lots of fun here, but this is the end. Or if it was Christmas, this would be a very festive end. Or perhaps we're talking about the end is nigh. But whichever end you're referring to, what you've done is you've used the word end and given it various kind of personalities and connections. To the point that really we don't have to even worry about using the word end. We could just say that's all, folks. And that really is all, folks. Wow. Well, that was a 2-hour marathon without a break. Okay. Well, that's me done. And I'm sure that was a lot for you to take in. So I've sent you an email. I'm just going to stop recording. And hopefully that might be a useful